Are we about ready? What do you think? Great. Well, welcome everybody. Good evening to you all. Father Bob Dowd, and I'm Assistant Professor of Political Science, and I also direct the Ford program here at Notre Dame. And thanks for being here tonight. As you may know, the Ford program sponsors discussions on development, which take place throughout the academic year. And tonight, we're really honored to have Carolyn Nordstrom with us, Professor of Anthropology here at Notre Dame. And she is one of those people who makes Notre Dame, Notre Dame. I can't imagine Notre Dame without Carolyn Nordstrom. Carolyn has devoted herself to studying very difficult, complex problems. And she goes where angels fear to tread in order to conduct her research. In war zones, in places where there's a great deal of violence, where drug trade is taking place, where human trafficking is a major problem. Carolyn really, I think, puts the dignity of the human person at the center of all that she does, all of her research. She tries to promote respect for human dignity, and she tries to get at the root of problems that affect human dignity, problems that affect human dignity in a negative way, that really are dehumanizing. So tonight we're going to hear about human trafficking, and you may know that throughout this month, ND8 and Inspire and Invisible Children from St. Mary's, together with the Center for Social Concerns of the Ford program, have been sponsoring a series of events focused on the problem of human trafficking, and it's a really huge problem, as you may know, and it's not an easy one to tackle. But tonight we're going to hear from Carolyn, who's the author of numerous books and articles, and that have really been that have really changed the world in a sense. That really helped people to understand the problems and to try to solve complex problems. So thank you very much, Carolyn, for being here tonight. Thanks for being one of those people who makes Notre Dame, Notre Dame. And let's all welcome her here for this Discussions on Development.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
I actually think you're
Thank you.
the heartbeat of Notre Dame, and I'm delighted to be invited and part of this. And I do think it's incredibly important, and I'm reminded again, just being here tonight, how truly important this is, as I begin once again to look at what's really going on. I'll talk for a little bit and then open it up for whatever anybody wants to do. But what I thought I'd do, I'm going to start with a story that's not that easy. But I thought that perhaps I would share with you how I got into the question of human trafficking. I'm supposed to, everywhere I've been in my life, and every study I was, I should say every study I found myself embarking on has been the result of a story that sort of brought me up, and I couldn't not look at it. I was trained as a medical anthropologist. Everywhere I went, there was a war. I couldn't not look. I'd be in war zones. I would see things, and I would begin to follow them. One was this story, and this is the story that launched me into following trafficking. It's not pretty. It's a sad story. I'm sorry. It does not end well. But it was the first time I was unable to look away. And I'm going to get back to what we see and don't see in the world. But it was 1990, and the war in Mozambique was pretty bad. Hundreds of thousands of street children who were orphaned by the war. Mozambique at this point in time was the poorest country on earth by United Nations and International Monetary Fund and everybody else's standards. I had been there a year, spoke enough of the language to get around. I traveled quite a bit. I knew a lot of people. And I was living up country, but I had gone down to Maputo, the capital city. And I got a call, but you know, when you're in a war zone, you actually don't really get a call often. Somehow somebody comes and gets you. In your mind, it seems like a call, but somebody came and got me and said, they want to see you at the hospital. Well, I hadn't really been working with a hospital. I didn't really spend much time with the doctors. In fact, I didn't really even know the people that were asking me to come down. And I don't know that to this day, perhaps, I'll really ever understand why it was me that they came to get. But I think it has something to do with, for some reason, wherever I was in my existential self, I think somebody thought that I could see. And obviously, I did, because I'm still telling the story, and it affected me very powerfully. But I went down to the hospital, and there was a little 10-year-old girl. She was dead. She had been mauled by a German Shepherd that international traffickers had brought in to have sex with, a German Shepherd, this 10-year-old girl, to make videos to distribute globally. And everybody was outraged. The Mozambican doctors said, we have got to stop this. The Mozambican judicial system, the police, everybody. I mean, it was so horrific. It was just so bad. This is a little war orphan. Now remember, these kids are all over. I mean, the level of war, 1 million people were killed. That's a lot of parents. So there's an awful lot of war orphans. And they're on the streets and they're hungry. And somebody says, hey, come on in. You know, I got a job, or I can give you a few cents if you help me carry something. All of a sudden, there you are with a German Shepherd. And you wonder, she died. I don't know why the German Shepherd mauled her to death, but there were others that weren't. And those videos circulate the world. But everybody wanted to say, you know what, we've got to make a statement. We have got to do something. You've got to get this to the level of public awareness. And the outrage is so deep. So they went to the embassies. These were international people. In this case, they were from Europe. And I tell this story because I do not want people to ever think that they traffic and we don't, or that this happens there but not here. It's completely global today. And the groups of people that do these kinds of things are global. They're just global, and they move through cosmopolitan centers of the world. This particular group happened to carry European passports. I don't know if the embassies of the people that were involved in this girl's death were touched by it or not. But I do know that before dawn the next morning, they had flown these people out. They had been making these films. Bastian's has seen this. I can see from your face. He's saying, oh, yeah, of course. If you have worked overseas, you've seen this. And you know that's what happens. I was outraged. The doctors were just deflated. The police were devastated. You know, how do you begin to fight this? And I talked to a lot of people, and thus began my question, how does this happen? How does any of this happen? And why would the ambassadors of these are people, I see them on TV, you know, you're like, oh wow, it's the ambassador of such and such, you know, how cool is that? Full of honor and integrity. Why do they fly these people out? These people killed a girl with a German Shepherd having sex with her. I mean, it doesn't get worse than that. How could they fly these people out? And most people said, even if they were horrified by it, they just couldn't take the bad PR. They just wouldn't allow it. And I ask you all to think about this. What if you were manning the office in a country and somebody said, well, we just got a couple Americans that did this. What would you do? And they say, hey, if this hits the presses, you know, what's going to happen? I began to study this then. And I wrote a number of articles, but one I wrote called Carlita's War, because I'd been studying war. What happens to kids in war? What happens to adults in war? What happens to grandparents? I mean, anything that happened in war, I was studying. And this really turned me around. So I wrote this article called Carlita's War. And basically it's like, all right, you know, so you're a kid on the front lines in a war somewhere. And you've got people shooting at you, and they're killing people you love, and they're burning down your house, and burning your crops, and killing your animals, and land mining, everything in your school's been bombed, and that's all bad enough. I started talking to the kids. You know what kids taught me? This is incredible. I love street kids for some reason. I think I must have been one in a former life because I love them. They adopt me. They show me stuff. I go out and talk to street kids. Do you know what they would tell me? They would say, literally, my mouth would drop open. They would say, Carolina, you know, we just want to let you know if we just disappear, don't take it personally. Because, you know, the bad guys are after us. I'm like, well, who are the bad guys? And they're like, well, you know, the troops that want to, you know, grab us and put us in the troops, or, you know, like those creepy foreigners that come and make us, you know, do really dangerous, scary, icky stuff. And they're like, we always, wherever we go, we have escape routes mapped out. You know, we'll jump over a fence, we'll run through this house. It's so common. And I gave a a street kid camera one day. And I was just curious, the old thing about when you go out and you give people cameras and see what they take pictures of. And I thought, well, Cal, try it. And I thought, well, he's starving. He's a street kid. This is Mozambique, poorest country on earth. I just gave him a camera. If he steals it, that's not going to be too surprising, but so what? I'll see what happens. So I gave this guy a camera, and next morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I am not a morning person, somebody's like throwing rocks at my window. It's him. He's standing out. He's been up all night taking pictures. And he was just shaking. He said, I want you to take these pictures out into the world and show them what the streets are really like. And I had not said anything about what he should take pictures of, but he spent all night taking pictures of the traffickers. People little girls getting beaten up or going off with, like 3 full-grown men from another country, all kinds of stuff like this. I still have the pictures. One I used in a book. Most of them I haven't used because I feel like it's too difficult. This is the reality. This is the reality if you're a kid in a war zone. You're not just dodging bullets and who are killing people you love and burning down houses. You're dodging traffickers. I mean, it's sick, but and this is just a fact of life for them. So I began looking into this, and the definitions of trafficking in the examples I'm going to give you are difficult, because if you're a hungry kid and you're 10 years old and you work in a sugarcane field, is that trafficking or not? Well, by the law it is. It's illegal. But I don't know, these are difficult things. But I want to talk a little bit about the law. When I wrote Carita's War, and I was going to look at it today, I think it was in Carita, because I wrote a couple of other articles. I can't actually, don't quote me on these figures right now, because I had a stream of students today that was really fun and nonstop, so I actually never got to go back. But roughly, it seems to me, I remember at that point in time when I wrote this back in those days, that roughly 218 million kids were in the agricultural industry illegally, working illegally in the agricultural industry. That over 100 million were working in jobs that were considered hazardous to your health. Chemicals, high places, noxious fumes. These are astounding figures. And sort of you think about the traffickers making these horrible films with girls and German shepherds. And that is one finger of a very complicated hand. And that hand does not just include sex work. In fact, it's not sex work, and that's one thing I do want to make clear when we talk about the definitions. It's forced labor, and I'll get to that in just a second. But more people, when I did this study, more people were trafficked in the agricultural industry. More people were trafficked into factory work than they were into forced sex labor at that time. So these are huge realities. And at that point in time, I realized something. And remember, I've been living in Mozambique. I speak the language. I'm comfortable on the streets. The street kids are my friends. And I realized something that is very, very hard to realize. And I want to say again, I do not really, in the work I do, see America and Mozambique and Singapore. I kind of see something that looks a lot like your brain, like a big neural net. Because most of what I document is very, very global. These flows are profoundly global, and that's why they are able to do what they're able to do. But I discovered there's 3 levels. There's a legal level, which we're familiar with, and there's a visibly illegal level, which we're familiar with. We see some of the kids working on the streets. We see some of the forced kids, the word prostitute is incorrect for children because by definition, if you're a child, it can't be prostitution because it's illegal, it's trafficking. But we see this a little bit, but we tend to think it's a little bit more rare than it is and a little bit more centered in like the bad part of town in a few sort of cosmopolitan cities. But I discovered that there is an underbelly of terrifying and tremendous proportions that we do not, for the most part, see, unless you're really kind of a creepy person. But it's huge. And I've been documenting that in a number of different ways. This began a lot of my work on illegal economies and the kind of power that they have in the world. But I want to tell you that the stories I'm telling you today are common. And I'll get back to that. But I want to take a second before I get into why and the development and what's going on here with all of this. How many of you, I didn't know how many of you are pretty comfortable with definitions of trafficking. Because I don't think, yeah, I know you are. I don't think many people are. So I printed off a few things to read you just a few definitions because it's surprising. Do you all know that trafficking is slavery? Do you all know that trafficking is not only slavery, but the anti-trafficking laws are built on, and for the most part, completely encompass the slave laws that changed our life back in the Civil War and other times around the world? That the trafficking is what it is. It is slavery. And this is not my term. That's why I brought some things in to read for you. This is what it is. It is that all the trafficking laws are completely 100% built on our anti-slavery laws that we fought the Civil War for. But I just went to a couple websites. I was up at 1 o'clock last night here at campus going like, punch, print, to bring in a few things. I didn't bring in much. But this is the United States Department of Justice. The term human trafficking describes the exploitation of human beings. It is a highly specific term with a highly specific meaning in the United States Criminal Code. Human trafficking crimes, defined in Title 11, Chapter 77, focus on the act of compelling or coercing a person's labor, services, or commercial sex acts. The coercion can be subtle or overt, physical or psychological, but it must be used to coerce a victim into performing labor, services, or commercial sex acts. Because these statutes are rooted in the prohibition against slavery and involuntary servitude guaranteed by the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, the Civil Rights Division plays a paramount role in enforcing these statutes, alongside our partners in the United States Attorney's Office and law enforcement agencies. Contrary to some misconceptions, human trafficking crimes do not require any smuggling or movement of the victim, which is why the story I told you about with the German Shepherd is trafficking, and also because it's a girl. It goes on to say that the government has successfully prosecuted human trafficking in crimes that range from agricultural fields through sweatshops, through suburban mansions, through brothels and escort services, across bars and barber shops, and just about anything else. That's the Department of Justice, but I wanted to introduce you also to the fact that 10 years ago, the United States led, in conjunction with the United Nations for a global set of protocols, the Global Trafficking in Persons Studies and Reports. And right now, this comes out every year, and the one that we put out in the United States is the most comprehensive analysis of all the countries. This came out in many ways supporting the Palermo Protocol at the UN. All of this came out in 2000. And it's astounding, in 10 years, 148 countries have signed the protocol. This is Grease lightning for the administrations of the world. This is unheard of. 148 countries. So I want to remind you that you can't say, well, that country has different laws. Because for the most part, they've signed it. They all share the same definitions. And 130 countries have signed legislation prohibiting all forms of human trafficking. Just to tell you a little bit about how they define it. Human trafficking is an umbrella term that has been used over the last 10 years to describe activities involving holding someone in involuntary servitude, whether that slavery is for the purposes of sex, whether it's for the purposes of labor, whether that person is a man, a woman, or a child, whether they've been moved across or around the world or across any international borders, or whether they are enslaved in a town or village that their families have lived in for years. Trafficking in persons is, as the Secretary of State says, plain and simply modern slavery. And I really want to stress this because people don't really understand what trafficking is. There's astounding numbers of discussions about prostitution. It's not prostitution. To say that human trafficking is prostitution would be like saying, and imagine yourself standing up in class and saying, well, the slaves on the plantations before the Civil War chose to be slaves, got paid for it, and were prostitutes. I mean, it's that incomprehensible. There's no relationship here. Any child that's trafficked, any child that is involved, so the coercion and no money, you're not paid. Any child that forces these circumstances, by definition, is trafficking, because they feel that a child cannot in any way give consent. This is all on the Department of State's website, and the reason I'm using this is that I want to really stress the fact that these are very legal protocols, and then I'm going to go back into some more general academic stuff. But these are the definitions that both the United Nations, the signatories, and we share. Forced labor, sex trafficking, bonded labor, indentured servitude, involuntary domestic servitude, debt bondage, forced child labor, child sex trafficking, child soldiers. It's interesting, isn't it? Much of the time I was thinking of, let me see how much I want to read you this story. I may come back to this. The Secretary of State right now, which in this case is Hillary Clinton, just released a 2011 report. And the ambassador, Luis Debaca, it's C-D-E-B-A-C-A, Debaca, is the ambassador at large monitoring, combating trafficking in persons and overseeing this through the Department of State. And Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of the United States, Secretary of Hillary Clinton's job. They work in tandem. Hillary Clinton did something 2 years ago that was surprising. She wanted to ensure people that we were being honest in this country about our realities. So for the first time, she began including a full assessment of the United States in this report. And her point is that there is no country on earth that doesn't have trafficking. There's probably no city that doesn't have trafficking. And they're figuring at a minimum there's 100,000 trafficked people, slaves, in the United States. If you add in child forced sex work, they figure there's 300,000 children forced into sex work in the United States. I fear it may be worse than that because I have been trained to see the underbelly in ways that most people haven't, and there is an underbelly so deep and so dark. And I'll tell you a story if we have time, and remind me about how many of you know about Anonymous. You know the hacker group Anonymous? Breaking into the underground browser system called Tor and finding 3 child rape sites and shutting them down this month. I mean, what they're finding. You can just go on Anonymous's website and look at this. If you know where to look, you start to realize the true depth and extent of what's going on. I brought this in to remind us that this isn't just agricultural work. This isn't just sex work. This isn't just the industry work. There's a huge problem with trafficking for fishing ships, for trawlers. There's all kinds of slavery on trawlers all over the world. I just printed this off to remind us that the problem is so much bigger than what we're normally presented with. Why? What's going on here? Basically, I can answer it in about 5 seconds. Why did we have slavery when it was legal? Well, because if you have a business and you have pure profit, you make a lot of money. If I have to pay you, I don't make as much money as if I just force you to work and take all the money. It's that simple. The remuneration is astounding. They figure, very conservative, there's 27 million trafficked people in the world. Just do the math about what that's adding up. But it seems, as I said, it's much larger than that. I wrote an article some years back that said sovereignty is largely built on the backs of trafficked people. A lot of this on women and children, vulnerable men. Because I study war, when you're a country, this links into your development, when you're a country coming out of war, when you're a country that's trying to develop, when you're a country that's trying to make some kind of mark in the world so that you have some kind of place, you need one thing more than anything else. You need hard currency. When I worked in Mozambique or Angola, Would you all take my Mozambican Medicae during those war years and give me dollars for them? I don't think so. They didn't trade on the national economy. The Mozambicans can get nothing. Medicines, energy, cars, hospital supplies, without hard currency. That's dollars, francs, yen. How do you get hard currency? Well, there's fish, timber, gold, diamonds, coltan, forced labor. This is one of the major ways that countries can get hard currency. Does it run through an underground? Yeah. Can the minister of state say, yeah, well, I'm trafficking kids because, I want to try to build up some money so I can buy medicines for the hospital? No. Does it happen? Yeah. Do countries turn a blind eye? Yes. How much of a blind eye? Well, I'll talk about that in a minute, but the ability literally to forge sovereignty is often running through these systems. Development often runs through illegality. And the more money you make, the more you win the game. The more power you can broker. The more you can become a player on the international scene. The more you can build roads, schools, tanks, whatever it is, depending on what you believe in. It is global. Your tomatoes in your salad are a few pennies cheaper because of those 218 million kids working in the fields. How many of you ask that question? We don't ask, for the most part. A handful of people do. And that's what I want to talk about, what we can see, what we're willing to see. And let me ask you a question. Y'all think about it, if I ask you just right now, think back to the slave era, pre-Civil War. Imagine yourself back there. What would you have done? Would you have been on the streets? Doing what you could to free the slaves? Well, there's more slaves in the world today than there were back then. Some more people. What are we doing? Why don't we even know about it? Why are there no movements? I mean, you all are doing wonderful stuff, but it's nothing like the slave era. Why? Why don't we even know? Why don't we even know what the definitions of trafficking are? Why are there people who still confuse prostitution with trafficking, which is just incomprehensible? What's going on? This is the same thing. We use the same definitions. The laws are based on the same. I mean, they are the same laws. We're using the same laws. There are a couple differences that I would like to point out, and they're bad for today. As Kevin Bale, who does great work on trafficking, shows, people are more disposable. He figures that people spend an average of $40,000 per slave on the plantations before the Civil War. Today, the average slave goes for a couple $100. If they get sick, it costs more money to treat them than to let them die and buy another one. Globalization makes buying them a breeze. I've spent a lot of time at ports looking at containers. You can stuff 20 people into a container. There's 6,000 containers on a given ship. They come and go daily. Nobody ever catches this. It's a vast flow. And it's more hidden because during the slave era, when it was legal, people were proud of this. It was built into the visible structures of society. Now it's hidden, and that underbelly is well hidden. These people are making a lot of money. It's hugely lucrative. They don't want to get caught. You don't see this. They work hard to make sure you don't see it. But what I want to ask, and this, I'm going to end up by going back to your dignity. We are exceptionally critical of people who had slaves during the slave era. We are exceptionally critical of scholars who justified that. A lot has been written about this. How will we be seen by the future? In 100 years, what will they write about us? And you're in this room, you guys care, you guys are doing something. But this is a message I'd like to carry out to the world. And it gives you maybe a few words to say this to people you meet. That say things like, oh, well, it can't be that bad, or there aren't really that many, or, it's really just a form of prostitution where they're getting remunerated and they're choosing it. And just say, well, you know what? Gee, look at how we treat people who said those things back during the slave era. How's the future going to look at us? I want to tell you something that I think takes us to the answer. I am different from most people. I have to tell you, I am astoundingly optimistic. I believe that change comes much more easily and rapidly than most people do. I believe that people have far greater power to change things than they believe they do. I believe that about a lot of things, and I have a lot of good examples because I've seen a lot. And there's this wonderful section of the Trafficking report that says, this year's 2011 Trafficking in Persons report by the U.S. State Department, Hillary Clinton and Ambassador Kadbaka, the underlying theme is, what's the idea of individual responsibility? What is it that we can do? And there's been a couple interesting conversations that people have started around this. 1/3 of all traffic victims that have been found and helped have been just individuals who saw something. It's incredible. 1/3, just average people going, hey, something's wrong here. Almost all major change in the world, if you document it, starts with individual action, not with formal legislation. We got the legislation. And it's really interesting. I have a freshman undergraduate class, and I said, write openly about it was an assignment about, I think it's all District 9, which is about South Africa and the invasion of the prawns, and relate it to your world. And somebody said, 18 years old, we cannot pretend that we are ignorant of the past. Being misguided in your beliefs is not a justification. We have seen the evils of human nature and the violations of human rights. We must learn from our past. If we continue to change the direction of our hatred and exploitation of different groups, we continue the repetition of an immoral history. The more generations beneath us should make us wiser because of their mistakes. Our generation has the past to use as a marker of right and wrong. Our generation should know better than to continue corruption, no matter the authority of the victims. This is cool. I mean, that's a lot of cool energy going on there for an 18-year-old burned out of my, freshman seminar. But I love the call. Kevin Bales, if you want to read him. If we want to eliminate slavery, we've got to do it ourselves, one citizen at a time. Almost every major positive change in our country was accomplished through grassroots effort. If we want to wipe slavery out, it's in our grasp. So we never did wipe it out. It may be illegal, but we haven't wiped it out yet. I want to tell you one last story, but before I do, I think I'm going to tell you. Do I have a few seconds to tell you a quick example of one I really, really love? To tell you where this comes from, they figure a poster with the simple facts of how to look at a person who might be trafficked and get a sense of if you think they are. Physical trauma, kinds of disorientation, certain kinds of not knowing where they are or what's going on. Simple things. They figure that a poster with that information that you can teach someone in 10 minutes has done more to stop trafficking than almost anything. And yet we don't put these around. But a group of school kids in Crescent Springs, Kentucky, where my great-grandmother comes from nearby, a group of school kids rehabilitated and rescued dozens of trafficked children. Their teacher was watching an Oprah Winfrey show one day about children forced to do dangerous work on fishing boats. She shared the story with the class. The class got together and decided they were going to adopt a project. They set a high goal to rescue and rehabilitate 40 kids half a world away. They learned how to design and put up a website. They created brochures and slideshows on slavery to educate other students, business leaders, and faith congregations. They donated babysitting money and allowances, baked cookies, sold lemonade, and in 6 weeks raised over $28,000 and rehabilitated well over their 40 victims. This is a group of school kids. I mean, how cool is that? That's not that hard. I want to share one last story with you. I'm going to take you back to Mozambique. Because we have to hear, we have to be able to see. Anything you read on trafficking says it is all around us. There's no city that doesn't have traffic victims. We just don't see them. Just simply seeing them is the answer. I was in Mozambique, and people were always complaining about people would turn up dead with body parts missing, and that people were being killed for muti, for black magic. And I would always go, because I'm a medical anthropologist, and say, well, let me see the body. Well, there's never any body. Well, let me talk to the family. Well, there's never any death. I could never figure out what was going on, but all these stories that would be typed up in the newspaper and get out on AP about, oh my God, these people were killed from Muti. There never was anybody. So during the war, I had been up country. I heard about these riots where a group of very poor people in a very squatter part of town during the war had gone up to a bunch of really nice cars from South Africa and dragged the owners of the cars out and given them a good thrashing and set the cars on fire. And they had done it because of Muti, because there was a big black magic market. And this whole thing was reported in BBC as well as a number of other places as kind of that tone of, oh, gee, look at those Africans doing this Muti thing, and here are these nice people from South Africa, and I mean, obviously they're not selling body parts, but these poor misguided people thought they were. Well, so I got real curious about that because it was one of my side things. Then I went down and just walked into the neighborhood, and within 20 minutes I got the story. I don't know why nobody else did. Do you know what the story was? It's a trafficking ring. They had gone to the police, they had gone to the ministries, they had gone to the embassies. Nobody would help them. So these very, very poor people got together and said, I guess we got to give these guys a warning. I personally thought it was fairly restrained that they only beat the people and set fire to the cars. If I had been a mother and had been my kid that had been under threat of these traffickers, international again, I think I might have done more than just give them a thrashing. But they acted together, and they did see, and they did make a difference. I'd like to see that a little more here. And you guys are here. Can we do it? Your turn.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much, Carolyn. Open it up for questions or comments.
Carolyn, I have a question about the U.S. State Department, the tip report.
Mm-hmm.
And so how accurate can it be if the underbelly is so well hidden? And is that an accurate picture then? Or how do we even collect information?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because one of the things that frequently surrounds discussions of trafficking, and certainly around the tip report and many other approaches in various places, is, well, the statistics can't be accurate, and somebody said this number, but they just made it up and everybody quoted it. But on the other hand, there is truth to that. We won't know for sure. But as one person, by myself, in countries that aren't mine, I was able to sort of walk along some of these routes and kind of get a sense of, well, how many, kids are living on the streets? What do they tell me? How, what are the sort of, if I just collect stories over the space of several months, what am I finding? And then if I go and talk to other people, then if I sort of go and look at what seems to be taking place in the agricultural industry, talk to some of the groups that have been working with these people, look at some of their statistics, compare them over time. As just one person, I got a decent sense of kind of sort of that visibly illegal, and the underbelly is a little bit harder. But there are these windows like this. I gave this anonymous one because, anybody can, that's all over the web right now. This just happened this month. It's such a lovely example of, these are teenage hackers, for God's sakes. These are people who want to take down Facebook. And yet they're fighting child rape videos on the underground video. We're not. How cool is that? But when you read the numbers of how many people belong to those sites, they published all of this. That's one window. There are tons like that. So you can start to get a sense of the dynamics and the shape and size of it. But I kind of agree with the people who say those who can count should count, but we shouldn't argue about it, because did we really argue about how many slaves there were for the Civil War? Or did we just say, this is illegal and immoral and there is no dignity in the system and it is just got to go?
Questions?
Or comments? Or stories? Pacience, I know you've seen a lot of this. You want to add? You've wandered around collecting stories of illegal transfer systems and sat in railroad stations and coffee shops and heard people talk about this stuff, I'm sure, because I know the kind of research you do. You've heard tons of stuff. Do you want to add any insights?
labor because literal labor children. And you mentioned like some people ask those questions. What are those questions and how would you ask them?
That's a good question. I think that's one of them right there. That would be the first one. Do you all have a sense of the layers of undocumented farm work in the United States? Because I'm guessing a few of you do, but most of us don't. And we don't ask because our lives are a little bit easier because of it. You know, our salads are a little bit cheaper. But I've had a couple students who just, wanted to do a research paper on it or started following blogs on it or did a couple interviews. I've had students who just started asking people to say, let's buy from places where we know that there's no, exploitation involved. And since things are so globalized today, there's some wonderful stuff on looking at, how some of those flows from other countries are using literally slave labor in the fields, and then we're buying from there so that we don't seem quite so complicit. I think you could start anywhere. I don't think you can solve it all, but just what's the system really look like? Where's our food really coming from? I'm always so surprised. I'm from Iowa. We're the #1 meth and amphetamine producing state in the nation. We win. I am proud of my home state. The methamphetamine production in the United States links in with two major forces. One is the undocumented farm labor because they're transit routes. And one is the fact that Cargill's, Monsanto, and a couple other places, the big, came in and bought up all the mom and pop places. Mom and pop don't have any money anymore. So actually what I love about Iowa is that it's like white, conservative, religious farmers that are making meth. And I like to use these stories because it isn't always out there somewhere. These are my hometowns. This is like my I would be surprised actually. My personal kinfolk were making meth, but not too surprised. But there's no doubt in Iowa. I mean, we all know that it's real hard to get a job at Cargill's or Monsanto if you're needing a job, because they bus people up from across the border in Mexico and pay them $5 an hour with no health care benefits. Why would they pay me minimum wage? We all know that, but nobody says anything about it. Why? This is the heartland of America. This is so stuff. Just asking anywhere at any point, but asking is you just did it.
Once you start asking those questions, where do you start looking for the answers?
So what?
Once you start asking the questions, where do you start looking for the answers?
See, again, I'm different, okay? But I also think I think I'm right. And if I'm right, it's a lot easier. I think asking the questions is the answer. Because I'm trying to think of ways there are people who are forced to have sex all around us. They're trafficked. And we don't. So how many of you have ever noticed somebody being forced to have sex? Now, okay, so not to notice, you have to tell yourself stuff like, well, who is buying a trafficked woman in our town here? And then you probably think, well, it's one of them back there, somebody that we don't know, not in my group certainly, but that's lying. So if you even ask the question like, well, wait a minute, who actually is buying these women or boys or whoever it is, because everything is sold, we're going to embarrass the people who are doing it. And that alone is going to take a step. But I find myself saying when people say, oh, well, blah, 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 I can't do anything and everything. It's like, you know what? Well, a guy who's going to buy like a little kid who's trafficked and a slave and force him to have sex, well, what if that person lives near a school or you? This is dangerous. So that alone gets people to start thinking, like, wait a minute, this is really not okay. People who buy little kids are not really very dependable, good people. What if they happen to be a basketball or a football coach? I'm sorry, it's in the news. Excuse me, I couldn't resist that. But you know what I mean, you know? Those things alone, the outrage of these two coaches that's just hit the news alone. Just asking that question, we don't even know, but just people are talking now. They're taking greater care. So I personally think in the act of talking and sharing stories, people begin just to do what they can. We can't do it all, but just, you know. If you saw one person in your lifetime that was trafficked, wouldn't you feel good about that? Turn it into a cop? And if we all did that, it'd probably pretty much be over. So I was just going to say, it's so hard to look at the underbelly, but I think we have to. I really don't think, as a democratic people, and I say that in a very broad sense because I've seen remarkable democracy in hunting and gathering communities and tribal units in, you know, inner Australia. I don't think we can have the dignity unless we're willing to see what really goes on in our world. I don't think we can shut our eyes. I think just even seeing it and saying to people, you know what, you can't pretend it's not there anymore. There's an awful lot of organizations say, oh, well, you know, we went to the brothels and we found 2 traffic victims. It can't be that bad. Well, it's because they're not in the brothels. They're in some horrible slime warehouse somewhere where you're not going to find them, you know. So to me, that's a huge part of it. Sorry.
How do you balance everything that you know and everything that you've been exposed to, like some of the horrors, and like just coming back to Notre Dame and being surrounded with people that either are ignorant or just don't know, or just because they don't want to, I don't know. Or like just with explaining everything.
Yeah.
I have Professor Oakley, and he says how for him, like laughing about it just sometimes seems to help.
Yeah, it does. But people here care. I mean, look, you're all here. You care. And that, I mean, you all are doing something. You're willing to take a stand. Actually, it sounds really funny, but it was Mozambique that taught me how to deal with it. Mozambique, I don't know why, but of all the places I've been on earth, I haven't been to DR Congo. Maybe better. I don't know. But barring that, Mozambique. I've been to a lot of places, mind you. Mozambique has had this amazing way of dealing with I don't know why, but Mozambicans had this amazing thing where they got together and they would see the underbelly. And I don't care where you went, you'd be out for Sunday tea, you would be out at someone's house for dinner, and people would be going like, how's your aunt, how you doing, how's everything going, you know, did you see the new prostitute, I think she's trafficked, let's walk by, oh, here, would you like another cookie? It's just a part of life. They don't run away from it, but they work together as a group and they talk about it. And most people say, oh my God, I can't stand it, you know, this is just, it's breaking my heart. People go, oh God, come on over, I'll give you a hug, you know. So that taking care of everybody, they taught me that, and so that's kind of how I walk through life now. And I figure if we get that going here, we'll be able to do more.
Other questions?
Why, Caroline, do you think they don't call it straight slavery? Why this kind of vocabulary, human trafficking?
I was wondering about that actually on the way over here. I was talking to Rahul, Professor Oka, and this is so awful, but you know, we were both being kind of incensed about people who confuse prostitution with trafficking, because I mean, to me, the people who do that are like the plantation owners that had slaves. I mean, why would you do that? I mean, as they even said on the report, and say, you know, like the definitions are all over the internet. It's really hard to miss them. I mean, there's a wonderful quote by Hillary Clinton saying, even the smallest countries on earth have read the stuff on the internet and have made prosecutions. You know, so how can it be? How can we make these mistakes in this world today? I think it's a combination of people used to think it meant crossing borders. Because I noticed, like with Rahul today, he was saying, so when we were talking about this, he said, God, he said, there's this case in Mumbai, you know, that I remember coming up where these women had been trafficked in. He said they were trafficked in from other countries. So for him, it was the concept of moving across borders. He said they were chained to beds and they were forced to have sex with 25 people a day, whether they were, pregnant or menstruating or ill or dead. And I was going like, what? Dead? I'd like, Rahul, that is a showstopper. I mean, like, dead? He's like, yeah, there a couple cases where I had sex with dead people. I'm like, that is really trafficking. Which is kind of that sense of, laughing when it's so gross you don't know what else to do. But the other thing is that people make so much money. I think they manipulate the definitions. I think some is just bad habit and old laws that used to be about borders and then they revise them. But if they're built on the original slave laws, why would we change the name? But it certainly has managed to obfuscate things, because how many people would you say in America know the definition of this? This is slavery. My God, in this country we had a civil war over slavery. How can we not know what it is? It's in every textbook by the time you're 2 years old, That's a great question. What do y'all think? Nikita.
Well, like in India, people have servants and maids who work in their house for 8-9 years old, and to them it's not, and all they can say about them is everything that they do wrong, like, oh, they don't clean the dishes properly, or they don't want to listen to they don't listen to me, but they never once say, oh, well, they're 8 years old and they're not supposed to be here in the first place. And I never thought of it that way either till I came here and I realized, well, that's not right.
Yeah, I think a lot of these conversations are very global. They reverberate around the world. It's not like it's like, India or America or Congo. It's like global cosmopolitan. I think that's what these people are also, the people that make money on this are also global cosmopolitans.
I think
You two are a match set.
it's just like, I don't understand kind of the failure of like the majority of people to even comprehend the problem, and after comprehending it, just like put it in the back of their minds, like, oh, well, it's not like affecting me personally. Because, and like, for instance, for like the Invisible Children event, we had a lot of people for the Invisible Children event, and we had less people as the events go on, and I think it's because like Invisible Children, that's in Uganda, that's really visible, that's so like, it's such like something that really grabs you, and then you get to something like, child prostitution and child trafficking in America, and people are like, oh, well, that doesn't really happen. Like,
I know.
And so it
only happens over there somewhere.
Yeah, so it's hard to like, I just don't know like where you begin to like try and get things going. Like where would you suggest like starting, I guess?
I have a great story. You're Erin, right?
Yeah.
I have a great story for you. So I'm talking to somebody. She wanders in my office. I have no idea who she is. She wanders in my office, like a couple weeks ago. And she says, like, you talk for a few minutes. There were like 6 other people in the office, right? It was chaos. So, and I've never really seen her since until right now. But you said something which will come up in a minute. So I'm talking to some people, now that I know I'm going to give this talk. And they're of the sort of, it's really not that bad. And, maybe these people want to do it. Maybe they're making some money. And, America wouldn't have these things. And I looked at them and I said, you know what? I had an undergraduate just walk in my office that I don't even know, and she got on the web and looked at Atlanta, Georgia, and found out how much they are selling trafficked kids for. If she can do that, I think you can too. And so I used you as an example to shame somebody who should know a whole lot better. I'm like, if my undergraduates are doing this and you can't, stuff's all over the place. Just open your eyes. So you ask a question where you actually were the answer. And she had mentioned that. She was talking about, God, I got on the website, they're selling them for, I can't remember what you said, $25 or something?
Yeah, it's like $25.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
$25 for what?
Like an act. So like,
Yeah. And these are kids.
yeah.
But good for you for doing that, And when you do that, I think it helps break barriers for other people. But if you do that and you're the undergraduate and they're the teacher or the prosecutor then they're embarrassed, and then they have to.
Also, what do you think of the just like how difficult it is with our laws in general to prosecute somebody for this crime, especially the hard process of a trial, and trying to put a 3-year-old through a trial of somebody who's sexually molested them or something? How is that in any way comprehensible to anybody that they would put a 3-year-old on the stand, And the fact that you can't use pictures. So say there's a missing child and you find a child pornography site, and even some of these pictures, you cut it off at the shoulders, and yes, it's bad, but why can't they put pictures like that in the paper so that somebody might see the kid? What do you think about that? Or
I again, my answers are going to be different from most people. I do believe in the law, and I believe people will change it, and I believe that happens from the grassroots for the most part. And I think when enough people say that's just absolutely ridiculous, you will change, it will change. Otherwise, it won't. But I also think that the way they get that going, I was trying to teach my class, my freshman seminar, about difference and prejudice and inequality, and they were talking, and then I showed them, have y'all seen District 9? It's wonderful. It's made in South Africa by South Africans after the fall of apartheid, and it's about these large lizard-looking things that they call prawns, and it's just, I got the most amazing papers about inequality and diversity and prejudice and racism and all this kind of stuff and the way it related to America and related to their lives after they watched District 9. And one of my students said, just this week, said, I guess we just have to learn in part by movies and stories. And so I think part of it is you write a screenplay about this stuff. You write a comic book, you write a song, a rap or hip hop, anything, That's a huge thing that helps as well. It gets people then to go out and do the grassroots to change the laws. What do you think, by the way? I know you had a question, but what do you think?
I kind of agree. I was looking at some of the different campaigns that have gone on. I just think that a lot of the campaigns are really one-dimensional, and so I think you need to approach it from a direction that you're not only targeting the people who are actually trafficking, but you need to be targeting the people who are buying, so it's I look at the Johns and the rules for that, and where the men who are caught, say with a prostitute or something, it's not them who get in trouble. They get minor charges, but they're not on the sex offender list. Why can't you put a John on a sex offender list? That's obviously something that there's some misconnection here that's not happening. And then I also think it's really important to go into schools and teach young girls that when you're running away from your home, if you're gonna run away from home, you cannot just meet up with somebody and the man who's coming up to you who's 40 years old is not a nice person. He's not trying to help you. Yeah. And so I think that a lot of the issue is that there's an unwillingness of the majority of parents even to tell their kids these things because they think it's going to hurt the kid, and they think it's going to make the kid upset. And
the kid's going to be a lot more upset if he gets harmed by her or she gets
upset a kid, and it's that sort of thing. And then I think there's also the dimension of rescuing the kids and having homes for them and changing the entire. It's a matter of changing the entire perspective of these kids because the woman too, but so many times you have a right to be angry. These kids have a right to be angry that this happened to them, and if you have a little girl who you rescued her from trafficking and she carries around a knife, of course she carries around a knife. Why wouldn't she carry around a knife?
Our troops carry around guns.
Yeah, she's 9 years old, but if she's cussing at you, this is how they learn to survive. It's a defense mechanism. Yeah. And so I think, but you get these people who say, oh, this child is obviously bad now. She's been dirtied or something, and it's just so I think you have to change it from so many directions, which is why I'm having a hard time figuring out what exactly to do because there's so many different things that relate to it.
Part of what you do is you know that you can do what one person can do, and you surround yourself with good people, and each one of you has a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and together you make a picture. You start trusting that there are really good people out there that you can work with, and trust that they'll do a part of it, and you just do the part that comes best to you.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, when you were wondering why people don't immediately equate human trafficking to slavery. I didn't know that much about human trafficking for the longest time, and then when I immediately heard about it, I didn't immediately go to slavery. And we were taught about it, but we were kind of taught with Emancipation Proclamation and the end of the Civil War, slavery ended. And so was that slavery ended. And then also, when it's it's modern day slavery, it's I see pictures of this, but it's not exactly shackled Africans on plantations in the South, so I don't immediately make the recognition. But it really is that
slavery
is ended, and that, but no,
yeah,
it really never stopped.
That's a great point. I think it kind of goes to Pacenza's point that, like, why do we change the words? Like, what's going on here? Because it's, and I don't mean like, gee, you should have known what the definition is. No, but, when you realize that somebody could have made a poster and put it up in a school or, handed it out in police stations, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we, putting this in textbooks? So I love what you're saying because it's so simple to fix that, and why don't we?
It would be like an easy jump to just continue teaching about slavery. Yes, slavery or legalized slavery in America ended then, but it's continued throughout. I mean, teaching kids when they're young, yes, it's kind of bringing a terrible reality to really young children, but still, it's kind of necessary that
kids
they start
know.
learning about it early.
I mean, the weird thing is that, like, kids kind of know stuff. I mean, I'm not certain that the invisibility doesn't have more to do with making us not look so that other people can make a lot of money and not protecting kids. I'm not sure, but like that's just an example of, like, I don't know, maybe you'd be writing a screenplay or working on legal advocates and he's writing a new textbook that will be in every, seriously, that one thing of writing a better textbook and putting this in it would make a huge difference.
Anything else? Any other questions? Are there any announcements? There are no announcements. All right. Well, Carolyn, I really want to thank you. This has really been enlightening. I found it certainly enlightening and troubling and disturbing as well. And I think that it makes me think that I could do more. And I know that I could do more. Perhaps it's also caused you to think the same thing. So thank you very, very much for your presentation tonight. And thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
So there's more food, I think, out there, just in case you're interested on your way out. Or just hang out for a few minutes. Feel free to get something and to have something to drink. Okay. Thank you.